swing into the saddle and set off across the 1860s American West, and you ask, what was it like to be a Pony Express rider? The first necessities of an answer are plain: the employer, the route, and the terms under which you are expected to carry the U.S. mail. You are on the payroll of the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, moving messages and small parcels under contract between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California. The route measures roughly 1,900 miles, and the service, operating mainly from April 1860 to October 1861, advertises a Missouri to California delivery in 10 days. Those facts shape everything you do from the moment you swing into the saddle. Your job is narrowly defined and uncompromising. You carry official mail in a specially designed leather pouch that fits over the saddle. The company requires you to keep the pouch with you at all times while mounted, and to deliver its contents from one station to the next, according to strict schedules. The contract you serve is with the Federal Mail System. The company is a private concern, but it performs a public function. Its promise of speed is what justifies the expense and the danger. The advertised 10-day transit time creates an expectation that moves through every layer of the operation, from the proprietor in the office to the stable hands at a remote station to the rider who mounts at dawn. The route itself is a long spine across a continent that is still being settled and defined. It begins at St. Joseph, a show of eastward civilization on the Missouri River, then pushes west over plains, rivers, mountain ranges, and desert to reach Sacramento, a growing terminus in California. Distances between the two endpoints are approximate because travel has to accommodate available roads, passes, and the locations of stations. The company lays out a system of relay and home stations along the way so that a single rider does not attempt the entire route. The whole enterprise is a chain of small, closely spaced points. A station every 10 to 15 miles where fresh horses are kept ready, and larger home stations perhaps 50 miles apart that offer food, a short rest, and the opportunity to change riders. That pattern is the backbone of the service, and it explains how the 10-day schedule can be advertised at all. Your shift is measured in short bursts. You are expected to ride hard from station to station, typically covering 10 to 15 miles before handing the mail to the next fresh horse and, sometimes, the next rider. On a longer assignment between home stations, you might cover several such changes in a single run, a rhythm that keeps the mail moving almost continuously, day and night. The company keeps teams of horses so that a rider can exchange mounts. Often speed depends on the rapid rotation of animals. You are supplied with a saddle intended for quick change and the leather mail pouch designed to be lifted off and secured by the next rider without delay. Efficiency is enforced because delays anywhere along the chain upset the whole schedule. The tools you use are simple and specific. A good horse is the most important tool of all, sound, fast, and trained to stand calmly while a rider jumps on and off. The saddle is sturdy and built to hold the mail pouch securely. The mail pouch itself is compact and arranged to be slung quickly. You carry little else. Large loads slow you down and are not permitted. The company's aim is quick delivery of small, important items, letters, dispatches, and occasionally small packages. Clothing and personal equipment are practical and minimal. You learn to pack light and to expect that what you carry will be tested by long miles and changing weather. The institution you serve, the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, organizes the service with a business-like focus on timing, horses, and stations. The company hires station keepers who maintain the line of relay and home stations, stable hands who care for the animals, and riders to carry the mail between stations. These workers form a network of responsibilities. Someone is always accountable for a horse, a saddle, a pouch, a stretch of track. The enterprise functions as a system of cooperation across great distances. Money flows from the federal contract, and private customers who pay to send letters more quickly than ordinary routes permit this money pays for relay horses, station houses, and the riders whose lives revolve around maintaining speed. Life on the route is shaped by the need for punctuality. The schedule is not an abstract goal. It is a rule that governs where and when you mount, how long you rest, and how carefully the company plants its stations. A 10-day schedule requires that the line keep moving without long interruption. That means riders must be ready to ride at all hours and to accept assignments that send them across difficult country. The company expects its riders to be reliable and to maintain the pace that makes the advertised transit time believable. Reliability comes from routine, briefings at home stations, knowledge of where fresh horses are kept, the practice of making quick handoffs at relay points, and the discipline to ride through conditions that would stop a slower traveler. The route exposes you to a range of challenges that the company admits in practice, even if its advertisements stress only speed. Terrain varies from level prairie to broken foothills and high passes. Weather can change quickly from heat to blizzard. Roads are sometimes little more than faint wagon tracks. Rivers have to be crossed where fords are practicable, and mountain passes must be found in the lines that teams of earlier travelers have established. The company places stations where they can be supplied and defended, but those stations are often isolated. Isolation means that help is seldom immediate, and that a rider must be self-sufficient in small but consequential ways. Treating blisters, hunting for feed for a starving horse, or finding a sheltered place to wait out a storm. Risk is part of the calculus. The company advertises its speed, but riders understand that speed carries exposure. Quick movement across remote country leaves you vulnerable to accident, to sudden weather, and to people who do not welcome strangers crossing their lands. The company's contract with the US Post Office puts a value on the mail and a responsibility on the carrier. The rider knows that loss or delay will not be regarded lightly. That sense of duty shapes behavior. You ride with the recognition that the mail is official and that its safe transfer is both a contractual obligation and an element of public trust. Within this system, habit forms quickly. You learn the line of stations by memory, the places where the terrain will slow you, and where the long, straight miles allow economy of effort. You learn which animals respond to a spurred touch and which must be coaxed. You compose compact plans for what to do if a horse is lame or a line is impassable. Your life is measured not by calendar days, but by handoffs. The moment you unclasp the pouch at one station, and the instant it is picked up by the next rider. That hinge is the unit of work, and the success of the enterprise depends on those hinges closing smoothly across all 1,900 miles. The company's ownership and organizational choices influence everything. Stations must be provisioned with hay and grain, and someone must procure supplies from nearby settlements and traders. Horses must be bought, broken, and rotated so that the line does not exhaust its animals. Riders must be recruited, paid, and disciplined. The company balances cash outlays for horses and stations against income from the government contract and private customers who use the expedited service. That business calculation, more than romantic notions of the West, determines where stations are built, how many horses are kept, and how often riders change. Timekeeping and communication within the system are pragmatic. The advertised 10-day schedule is the promise that shapes public expectations, and the company organizes to meet that promise. When the line operates smoothly, mail moves at a pace that is remarkable for the era. When it does not, the company absorbs the costs, and the route becomes an example of how fragile such an enterprise can be. For the rider, the practical effect is routine vigilance. You know the schedule, you know the stations, and you know that your role is to be the link that keeps the line moving. Those facts, the employer, the roughly 1,900-mile route between St. Joseph and Sacramento, the relay of stations, the reliance on the fresh horses, and the advertised 10-day delivery define what it is to be a Pony Express rider in the most immediate way. The work is concentrated, purposeful, and bounded by the company's contract to carry U.S. mail. It is an occupation that rests on a network of people, animals, and places arranged to make speed possible. From the saddle, you see how each small handoff matters, how every station and every horse is part of a single obligation: to move letters across a continent with as little delay as possible. Ahead lies the detail of daily routines at the stations, the tools you depend on in practice, and the precise risks you face as you ride. Those pieces will show how the promise of 10 days is turned into the lived pattern of a rider's work. You ride light, with little more than the leather saddle beneath you and the mochila that fits over it. The mochila is the shape of a small, rigid pack designed to sit securely on the saddle horn. And cantelet limits what you can carry and keeps the letters and packages accessible. Because of that limit, personal gear is spare: a change of shirt folded thin, a blanket or slicker if the season demands it, and whatever small tools the company allows. The job is not to be self-sufficient for weeks on end, but to move what you are given from station to station with as little delay as possible. The company that employs you lays out the route and the rules. Stations are placed so that horses and riders can perform at their best. Relay stations are typically about 10 to 15 miles apart. There you find another fresh horse and a hand who has the mochila ready for the quick exchange. Home stations come less frequently, roughly every 50 to 75 miles, and serve as nodes for food, rest, and more thorough care of the mounts. Those distances are not arbitrary. They reflect how far a horse can sprint without long-term damage, and how long a rider can push in one go before fatigue slows the line. Your routine begins with the saddle and the mochila already prepared. At a relay station, the process is practiced to the point of economy. You ride up, a pair of hands takes the reins, the saddle is eased off, the new mount brought close, and the mochila is slipped from your saddle to the new one in a single motion. It is designed for that. Leather pockets that hang on either side, and a central pouch that balances the load. The exchange is a kind of choreography, because the moment you are delayed, the whole schedule feels it. The horse that takes you from one relay to the next is fresh. Its job is to carry you hard for a short distance. The saddle is a working saddle, sturdy and familiar to you, chosen for security and speed rather than comfort. For that reason, you learn to ride in a way that keeps weight balanced and strain minimal. At home stations, the tempo changes. They are larger, sometimes a cluster of buildings and corrals where a rider can eat, mend clothing, and sleep for a few hours. The mounts get a longer rest and better feed. The rider does the same. The home station is where you swap stories with other hands and where supplies for the next stretch are organized. The company depends on those stations to keep the line moving. The relay system conserves the energy of each individual horse and prevents the rider from carrying burdens that would slow the run. It also distributes responsibility across many people, so a single delay rarely takes down the whole route. Your employer enforces a discipline meant to minimize delay and loss. Time is the metric of the job. How many miles you cover between exchanges, how quickly the mochila passes from one saddle to the next, how reliably the stations are staffed. There is an economy of weight and time that shapes every decision. You do not carry pack animals, heavy baggage, or spare food beyond what you can cinch into your saddle. The fewer interruptions you create for yourself, the less likely you are to be late. The company provides the structure, the placement of stations, the horses, the basic outfit, and you supply the execution, steady hands, quick mounting, and the willingness to ride when others might not. The route itself varies in character, but not in the logic that defines your day. Plains give you long, straight stretches where speed is measured in miles rather than maneuvers. Mountain passes require attention to footing and a kinder pace for horses in thin air. Desert stretches demand strict water discipline at stations and a careful eye for timing. Whatever the terrain, the spacing of stations is your constant. When you reach a relay at 10 or 12 miles, you expect a fresh horse. When you reach a home station some distance later, you expect a cup of food, a place to lean, and a chance to check the tack. Those expectations are the backbone of the system. When they are met, the line functions with mechanical reliability. When they fail, the consequences are immediate: delayed mail, exhausted horses, and a frayed company schedule. The mochila shapes how the mail is handled. It is both simple and practical. It rides on the saddle where you can reach it, and it passes like a baton from rider to rider. Because it constrains what you can carry, you learn to treat each item inside as significant. Letters that may bear business contracts, military dispatches, or personal news are the business of the day. The mochila's small size discourages bulk and encourages speed. You rarely open it unless you must. Its contents are catalogued at stations and entrusted to you precisely so that you do not linger. The tools of the trade are modest and functional. Your saddle is chosen for security and for the way it accepts the mochila. The leather is maintained to prevent chafing and slippage. Reins, cinches, and stirrups get quick checks at every change. The riders who tend stations keep a stock of fresh horses and enough feed and tack to turn an exhausted mount into a serviceable one for the next exchange. Because the job depends on predictable animal performance, the care of those horses is as much a part of the route's success as the speed of any rider. Customs grow up around these practicalities. There is an unstated etiquette at stations. Do not wake a sleeping hand unless the each schedule demands it. Hand over the mochila without fuss and inspect the animal assigned to you before you leave. There is a rhythm to how you ride and how you breathe. You preserve your own endurance by riding smart, not by resisting pain. Riders learn to read a horse by its gait and breath, to sense when it needs an extra minute at a station and when it can be pushed a few miles further. The company's rules are the scaffold, but the small judgments you make at each relay accumulate into the line's overall efficiency. There are causal chains that make the system work. Horses changed often mean a steady average speed over long distances, which means mail can be delivered on a predictable schedule. Predictable station staffing means riders can count on food and a place to lie down when the next home station looms. A mochila that is easy to pass and hard to tamper with minimizes delay and keeps the contents secure. Each choice about spacing, equipment, and staffing is the company's attempt to translate fragile things, animals, weather, human stamina, into a dependable service. Your daily work is the human link in that translation. You also become accustomed to the ways the line mitigates risk. Because you ride light, the penalty for a fall is often smaller than it would be if you bore heavy baggage. Because horses rotate often, the probability of a single animal collapsing from overwork is lower. Because the mochila is kept accessible yet compact, a quick transfer can be made even in damp or cold weather. Those practical design choices are not romantic. They are engineered to make a fragile enterprise functional across long distances and through uncertain conditions. There are limits to what the system can do, and you learn those limits quickly. Long stretches between home stations test both rider and mount. Sudden weather can close in and slow the line. Delays at a single relay ripple outward. The company plans for such eventualities with spare horses, extra hands at stations, and a disciplined schedule, but surprises still register. Your training is partly technical and partly a steadying of nerves. To ride when visibility is low, to manage a tired horse without damaging it, and to preserve the mochila's integrity when circumstances conspire against you. The employer's presence is felt in the constant attention to efficiency. The company defines the route, supplies the horses, maintains the stations, and sets standards for care and performance. It hires hands at stations and riders for the intervals between, and it depends on each person to execute precisely. The network is an economy in miniature. Every relay station buys the company time. Every home station buys the rider and the mount a longer breath. The entire enterprise rests on a careful balance between speed and sustainability. You come to measure success by how well that balance is maintained. A good run is one where exchanges are quick, horses leave the station fresh, and the mochila moves without interruption. A bad run is a string of delays, an exhausted horse, or a missing rider at a station. In either case, the system knows how to absorb a fault because it was built to redundancy in animals, redundancy in hands, and a discipline that expects quick, pragmatic adjustments rather than heroic improvisation. The job has rhythms that belong neither to office hours nor to the natural day. You ride when the schedule demands it, you rest when the stations allow it. The route continues regardless of the individual. Your work is to fit into that line so tightly that it seems inevitable. A sequence of small, precise actions that together produce speed across vast distances. That is the essence of what it is to be a rider on this system. Not to carry the whole enterprise on your back, but to carry your link faithfully and swiftly so the network as a whole can function. From your leather saddle, with the mochila at your hands, you become part of a chain that connects distant places. The mechanics of the route, the spacing of relay and home stations, the limits of the pack, the supply of fresh mounts, define the day and the decisions you make. The employer's design and the station's discipline shape the work into a predictable pattern. You learn to trust the system and to do your part in keeping it moving. Ahead lies more miles, more exchanges, at the next home station where a brief rest awaits you. Gather yourself, slip the rein into your hand, and ride toward it. You carry government mail under the authority of the Post Office Department. That phrase shapes everything about the job. The packet you strap into the mochila is not merely a private letter or a parcel. It is entrusted to you under federal authority, and its movement matters to officials in Washington just as much as to the townsfolk whose names it bears. You are, in formal terms, a carrier appointed by a private company working for the department. But in practice, the lines are simple. You are responsible for getting government communications and contracted private mail from one relay to the next, across a landscape divided into organized territories, military posts and settlements that have only recently begun to feel permanent. The route runs by fixed habit and pragmatic need. It threads between army posts such as Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie, whose presence matters beyond reassurance. Soldiers at these forts offer a point of contact when weather, breakage, or trouble makes a change necessary. Officers keep records. Telegraph operators nearby sometimes exchange information, and the forts serve as places to rest, buy supplies, or leave a message when the trail becomes impossible. You learn the names of the posts as if they were stations in a larger mind. Fort Kearny, rising from the Platte Fort Laramie, a known distance further west. The country between is not continuous settlement, but a line of stations, each a predictable interval where a fresh horse waits and another rider will take the mail when the timetable demands. Your employer is, in the end, the Post Office Department. The department sets standards and awards contracts. It issues directives about how mail is to be handled and how much the government will pay to have it carried. You work for a company that won a contract to move mail rapidly across long prairie and mountain runs. The company provides the basic structure: stations at intervals of 10 to 15 miles, station keepers who look after horses and provide food, and a system of exchanges designed to keep the packet moving without delay. The department's stamp gives the enterprise legitimacy. It also imposes expectations. Arrested delivery or lost mail is not a private failure alone. It is a federal concern, and the knowledge sits with you like a weight. The official seal in the packet means that somewhere, someone is counting on its arrival. The tools of the trade are instruments of efficiency more than ceremony. A mochila sits over the saddle, leather cut to fit and slotted so it will not swing it. Carries the mail pouches, small enough to be picked up and shifted at a change. A short saber or pistol hangs mostly as a deterrent. The real protection is speed. You change horses frequently. A fresh mount at a station keeps pace up across the plains and over the passes. The stations are small, practical places. Attack, feed, a bed if the keeper is generous, and the knowledge of when the next rider is due. The mail is wrapped and sealed. You handle it with a straightforward care, avoiding unnecessary contact and ensuring that the official seals remain unbroken. Sometimes a dispatch bears the embossed stamp of the Post Office Department or a notary's signature. Sometimes it is a private letter that nevertheless moves under the same roof of federal warrant. In either case, you treat it as if it will one day be the subject of official inquiry. Your routine is built on relay. You ride until the station appears, hand over the packet, and swing aside while the next mount takes off. The change is practiced and quick, a choreography of movement and efficiency developed because the time saved accumulates. Sleep is arranged in small segments. Station keepers will offer a cot or a chair by the fire. You rest your body in a posture that allows immediate departure. Meals are taken when the schedule allows. Few ceremonies, mostly stews, hardtack, coffee. The company pays for speed, and the post office department pays for regular movement. The rhythm of your days is tuned to both. Operating across organized territories means dealing with shifting jurisdictions and varied populations. Where the territory is organized, there are formal county seats, records, and a semblance of legal order. Between these are the unincorporated stretches, where trapper camps, ranches, and indigenous nations occupy the country in ways that are not always recognized by the department's maps. You ride on, authorized by the department, but the ground you cross is rarely indifferent to prior claims or current conflict. Army posts act as landmarks and as pragmatic partners when scouting parties, supply trains, or diplomatic missions need a message carried. They also regulate, in their way, the safety of corridors. When a regiment is moving supplies, when scouts send back word of hostile activity or an outbreak of disease among livestock, you adjust routes or accept temporary delays. The presence of a fort is not a guarantee of untroubled passage, but it is a structural support for a service that depends on predictable intervals. Customs develop among the people who staff and use the line. Station keepers, often former teamsters or pioneers, expect a certain manner from riders: economy of speech, quick exchanges, and a willingness to keep to the timetable. Riders cultivate reputations for promptness and steadiness. A rider who misses delivery risks not only pay, but the loss of future assignments. The Post Office Department's authority is enforced not as a threat, but as a standard. When the nation wants to move information across the continent, it relies on those who will accept that standard in practice. There are unwritten rules too. How to leave a message for a fellow rider who has been delayed. How to mark a damaged route so the next rider performs caution. When to seek the aid of soldiers at a post rather than a local settler. These customs smooth the friction of daily operations and are as important as the tangible tools in keeping the line alive. The changing communications landscape shapes everything by cause and effect. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph in October 1861 decisively altered the service's utility. For a little over a year, rapid mounted service provided a practical speed advantage for personal and official mail. Once the telegraph connected the coasts, messages could cross the continent in an instant that a mounted courier could not match. That technological change was not merely a matter of convenience, it reconfigured the economic calculus under which the Post Office Department and private contractors operated. Telegraph lines offered near-instantaneous relay for governmental dispatches and urgent private communications. The postal contracts then began to look like an anachronism where speed was essential. The demand shifted, and the reason for maintaining a relay of riders diminished. The effect on the route and the riders was immediate and administrative. Contracts that had been profitable became less so when the department found other ways to move priority messages. The company that employed you must reckon with a landscape in which the government reduces its reliance on mounted couriers for urgent dispatches. Station keepers find fewer riders passing through some stations close or are repurposed as stagecoach stops rather than relay points. You feel the change in ordinary ways. Fewer long runs, different types of cargo, and a sense that your work is increasingly specialized or redundant. You adapt as best you can, taking on stage or freighting work where possible, seeking military contracts when they arise. But the telegraph's presence is a long shadow over the established practice of riding mail. Operating near army posts can prolong a rider's relevance for a while, because not all messages or supplies can be carried by wire, and military logistics still depend on animals across difficult terrain. Army officers value the reliability of a trained rider who knows the line and the landscape. For a period, the presence of forts like Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie integrates the mounted service into military communication networks. Couriers carry orders, requisitions, and personal letters between command points. That work is sometimes contracted by the department, sometimes arranged by direct agreement with military officials, and always consistent with the sense that government-level communications require trustworthy conveyance. There is also a social element to the Post Office Department's role. Federal stamps, contract terms, and official timetables create a shared expectation across distant communities that mail will arrive. People in small settlements mark the schedules and plan significant decisions around expected deliveries. The knowledge that a company under the department's authority will move a packet on a given day gives settlers and administrators alike a layer of predictability in a region where predictability is scarce. When the service changes, those expectations shift. Towns can become less connected, and the way news circulates changes. The telegraph concentrates speed into channels that are urban and institutional first, rather than personal and local. Your daily judgment is practical. You measure distances between stations, the condition of horses, and the state of the trail. You check seals and note any irregularity in a ledger kept at each change point. When weather worsens, you rely on the station network and on the informal intelligence shared by station keepers and soldiers alike. When hostilities threaten, you accept the instructions of military authorities to reroute or to suspend operations. The Post Office Department's authority gives you a framework to work within, but the actual decisions are often local, made to secure the mail and protect life. In the course of a season, you accumulate small proofs of how federal organization and private enterprise interact on the frontier. A stamped packet left at a fort for an officer to pick up a ledger entry showing the handover from one rider to another, a station keeper who knows the name of every mail pouch that has passed through his hands. The telegraph's arrival does not erase those traces, but it reassigns value. The mails continue to be carried, sometimes by stage, sometimes by military courier, sometimes by rail as lines advance. The routes that once required riders to risk long desert stretches and steep passes become roads for other vehicles. Your own role narrows or shifts, finding work where speed still requires horseflesh and where terrain leaves the wire useless. You bear in mind that a service devoted to speed and endurance cannot be separated from the larger sweep of communications technology. The Post Office Department's choices about contracts and methods reflect a national need to connect a continent, and the telegraph is one form of achieving that need at a different scale. For the rider, the consequence is practical and immediate. Fewer routes, fewer rides that rely solely on mounted dispatch, and a slow fading of the business model that made your skill indispensable. You continue to ride while the need exists, performing the duty entrusted to you by federal authority and by habit. The line runs on as long as it must, and the telegraph, completed in October 1861, becomes the measure by which the pony service's necessity is judged. You ride on, aware that the landscape of communication is changing and that the next assignment may ask for a different kind of endurance. You take the job because you fit a certain shape, light in weight, steady in the saddle, willing to ride at pace for hours on end. The company that runs the line looks for riders who can wring speed from a horse without overburdening it, who will obey the clock and the course, and who will trust the network of stations to carry them and the mail forward. Your day is organized around a simple economy of motion. At a station, someone hands you a fresh mount and the leather case that holds the day's dispatches. You check straps and cinch. You mount, you ride until the next station, and you hand off to the next rider. That pattern repeats in measured intervals across plains, through cuts of broken country, and over rises where the wind can suddenly stiffen the work of a horse and the work of your hands. The routine is meant to make speed manageable. Horses do not run themselves into the ground because they are switched out. You do not carry every supply because station keepers keep feed, tack, and basic repairs ready for the next relay. The system is the thing that lets an individual do a long and dangerous job without needing to bring a whole caravan of gear and support. Because the company prizes quickness, most riders are young. Being slight matters in a practical way. A lighter rider means a fresher horse and higher pace between stations. That shape of body also brings expectations about how you ride and how you conserve strength. You learn to sit in the saddle in a way that uses the horse's motion most efficiently, to shift weight subtly when a slope tightens, to breathe in a manner that keeps hands steady enough to manage gear and reins. The work is precise, not dramatic success, looks like a string of routine swaps and the steady passing of distance. You are trained to rely on the relay network. The stations are caretakers of the line. Someone keeps a watch of weather and horses, tends animals, patches. Leather keeps a pot of food for a rider's short stop and stores the spare gear that keeps the schedule moving. That human chain is the backbone of the enterprise. Without it, a single rider speed is merely a lonely burst of motion with no lasting effect on the continuity of mail. You carry a revolver more out of pragmatic caution than a certainty of combat. It is a tool for short-range defense, useful if a band of highwaymen tries to demand the mail or if you must dissuade a desperate or hostile party. The weapon does not make the landscape safe. It only gives a narrow margin in places where an encounter becomes personal. For larger dangers, you depend on the network. If snow shuts a pass, the station keepers have to report and the schedule adjusts. If a river rises, someone at a station must send word, and parcels may be rerouted. The company's way of working is to distribute risk. Horses, riders, supplies, and knowledge are shared along the line so that anyone's setback does not collapse the whole route. Weather and terrain are constant variables you plan for and adapt to. On high ground, wind can strip the heat from your hands and turn a stretch into an endurance test for horse and rider in low ground. Sudden rains change tracks to mud and make the pace dangerous. Roads are rarely more than crude. Where the route crosses unsettled country, the path follows what is passable rather than what is engineered. In mountains, the climb shortens muscle and patience, while on open plains you must keep a horse moving steadily to save time and energy for the next change. Each kind of ground shapes a different way of riding. The company's assumption that quick relief at stations can offset hostile terrain is practical but not infallible. A string of bad weather, a broken saddle, or the wrong kind of ground underfoot can slow a relay and leave you farther from help than you expected. Several human hazards complicate the physical ones. There are outlaws who look to intercept mail because it is valuable and because the line is a corridor through unsettled regions. They may attempt a forced stop or observe and choose a place where a rider is isolated. That threat pushes the company toward rules of movement. Ride in times that make surprise harder. Keep to relays so a single rider does not linger alone, and place stations where someone can be summoned if trouble begins. At the same time, the establishment and use of such a line are part of a larger, contested story on the land. In some places, the presence of the route cuts across traditional travel, hunting, and settlement areas of indigenous peoples. Resistance to incursions on territory and resources occurs in forms as varied as guarded warnings, attempts to halt traffic, or armed actions in places where livelihoods are threatened. For a rider, this means that any passage can carry political weight in addition to physical risk. You cannot treat the job as if it exists in a vacuum. The mail passes through landscapes where other people's rights, laws, and responses matter. The company's aim to move information quickly collides, sometimes painfully, with those realities, and riders operate in that friction. Customs and informal rules develop among riders and station keepers to manage the ordinary stress of the work. Respect for the horse is practical and nearly universal. A ruined mount ends a run and can cause injury, so tack is checked carefully at every change, and a tired horse is given water and rest. Riders learn the habits of keepers, who will feed a horse first, who will patch leather, who has a spare bit or a hand for lifting. There is a quiet etiquette to passing along the line. The mail pouch is never discussed in public beyond its receipt and transfer, and the expectation of confidentiality is part of being a carrier. The network runs on predictable, discrete actions. Handoffs happen with few words. Stations keep schedule records and pass on information about road conditions, and riders are expected to know the procedure for reporting trouble. These small rituals are how reliability is practiced, and they turn the line into more than a string of individual efforts. They make it a coordinated service. The work is often solitary in the moment, but not solitary in structure. You ride alone across a stretch, and yet every mile is underwritten by other people's labor. The station keepers, horses, the driver who moved feed to a remote stop, the blacksmith who mended a stirrup, the schedule clerk who set the timetable. That interdependence is a source of steadiness. It is also a source of pressure. The company measures performance in hours and days, and will judge a missed relay as a failure that ripples through the system. Riders are expected to be punctual and to keep the mail moving even when weather and discomfort press hard. The horizon for you as a rider is therefore both immediate and administrative. You must read the country under your horse, and you must also attend to the expectations of a timetable that is larger than your personal endurance. Physically, the job is demanding, but not fantastical. Rides require control and stamina more than brute force. You condition your body to the saddle, you learn to economize motion, and you rely on basic maintenance skills. Mending a strap, setting a shoe temporarily, treating a fresh cut on a horse's leg to keep going. Most riders accept that danger is a part of the bargain. The faster and straighter the line runs, the more exposed each link is to mishap. You are less a daring figure than a disciplined element of a system designed to make communication rapid across long distances. The company wants speed without reckless loss. Your job is to deliver within those limits. In the end, being a rider on the line in the 1860s, West is a work of narrow expertise and continual negotiation with forces beyond your control. You are chosen for your body and taught to value the relay. You carry a revolver because places are not always safe. You rely on station keepers to manage horses and supplies and to adjust the route when rivers, storms, or human resistance intervene. The route is a chain of small, practical transactions made under the constant possibility of delay or conflict, and the employer's plan for speed depends on a human network that can respond to trouble. To be a Pony Express rider is to live in a balance between individual skill and communal support, to accept routine as the mechanism of reliability, and to ride knowing that, in that particular moment of American expansion and contest, delivering a letter could mean more than simply moving paper. It meant threading a fragile line of connection through a landscape of weather, terrain, and human claims. That is what it is like, a job of youth and steadiness, of trusting the relay, and of meeting hazards with a practiced, cautious resolve. Your job is a string of brief, exact motions threaded across vast country. You are paid to carry government mail from the Missouri River to California, and the work is built around a single, efficient idea: keep the packet moving. The company that employs you organizes the route into a chain of stations and a schedule that must be kept. Relay stations sit 10 to 15 miles apart, spaced so a fresh horse can wait at each change and a new mount can be on its way before the old one is exhausted. Every hand has a role. Station keepers ready horses and meals. Relay hands hold spare stirrups and water. You are the rider, expected to take the mochila, the leather 4-pocket mail pouch, and ride on until the next change. The handoff is a practiced move. The mochila fits over the saddle and snaps in place. You slide it off and on without slowing the horse more than a few heartbeats. Your life on the route is economy and momentum. Before a run, you check tack and the fit of the mochila. A loose strap or a pinched edge can mean lost time or lost mail. You ride with minimal baggage because every extra pound slows both you and the horse. That lightness is a kind of discipline. Clothing is practical, suited to whatever country you cross. You are expected to know the routine at each station, so you do not have to ask for directions. The timetable and the map are in your head. In the relay system, speed is not just a matter of riding fast, it is the result of coordination. Horses rotate at repeatable intervals. Hands know how to get a fresh mount in motion the instant you arrive. If the route runs through a stretch where stations are farther apart, a longer leg is planned and another rider may stand ready. The system depends on steady, small acts repeated over and over. The route takes you through changed country, but it is the organization of that distance that matters most to the work. The line runs roughly from a river terminus in the east to the Pacific terminus in the west, and the company's contract with the government makes the run an official enterprise. That contract brings both responsibility and scrutiny. The mail is government property. Guaranteeing delivery is not merely a matter of profit. It is a public obligation that affects business, politics, and the lives of people who depend on news and letters. To meet that obligation, you ride by a schedule measured in days rather than weeks. Timetables are strict delays must be explained and, if possible, remedied. Tools and customs grow from those demands. The mochila is the emblem of the job. Fitted to the saddle, it holds the official bag and is arranged so that a single hand can exchange it. Horses are chosen for endurance and brisk speed. They are worked in short bursts and then rested. Station practice calls for quick meals and short sleeps, a pattern of activity and rest calibrated to keep the line moving. When you arrive at a home station at the end of a long run, you may rest for a few hours and then prepare to turn around. The relay nature of the system keeps the flow continuous. Riders learn to judge a horse's breathing and stride, to know when to press and when to back off, because horseflesh is as much a resource as the mail itself. Risk is a constant factor, and it shapes nearly every choice. Weather can slow or end a run. Sudden storms, mud, and mountain snows make the timetable a fragile thing. The landscape presents hazards of terrain. Long prairie stretches where water is scarce, river crossings, rough ridgelines and, in the west, sharp mountain passes that demand careful navigation. There is the risk of attack, a possibility approached in different ways by different riders and stations. Some parts of the country are more exposed than others. Routes were chosen with an eye to both directness and safety, but no line is immune to trouble. In the conventions of the work, you are expected to be alert, to plan for contingencies, and to accept that danger resides in the job. Those risks explain why the job attracts a particular kind of person and why the company adopts particular standards. Riders are chosen for smallness as well as skill. A lighter rider reduces strain on a horse and can maintain higher speeds. Youth and agility are advantages, as is a steady nerve. Riders are taught a set of expectations about punctuality and responsibility. The company enforces rules about transfers, about the custody of the mail, and about conduct on the road. A rider who fails to hand off properly, who lets the mochila fall, or who loses the mail faces more than loss of employment. The breach weakens the whole contract and the company's ability to hold government business. The system is tightly organized in other ways. Stations are run in tiers, small relay stations with a handful of horses, and nothing in the way of lodging larger home stations with an innkeeper, a store of provisions, and a place to sleep for riders who end a longer segment there. Supply lines keep feed and equipment moving so that stations don't run dry. The company collects schedules and maps riders are expected to meet not only the next station, but the timetable agreed upon for the entire route. You do not ride aimlessly. Every mile belongs in a plan, from the spacing of posts to the selection of routes around difficult terrain. It is an economy of motion. The faster the handoffs, the shorter the overall trip. That efficiency produces remarkable speed. In a time when overland travel usually took weeks or months, the relay system allows the mail to cross the continent in days. The brief, sustained bursts of riding, transferred from one fresh mount to another, sweep messages from coast to coast with a pace that feels unprecedented. The company advertises, and the government relies on that speed. Messages that before required weeks now arrive in half the time or less. The work transforms the meaning of distance for people who depend on letters and commercial notes. That transformation is the reason the enterprise exists. To shrink the map by combining human energy and coordinated logistics. Yet the same qualities that make the system fast also make it vulnerable. The route runs across unsettled country where supply and protection are uncertain. Stations are exposed, they are small, thinly manned places that can be cut off by weather or by conflict. The relay depends on physical networks of horses, men and supplies that are costly and brittle. A telegraph, once it reaches across the line, is a different sort of network. Instantaneous, less subject to the delays of weather, and usable at any hour with no animals or stations to maintain. Once the telegraph lines reach across the nation, they render the relay system obsolete. By late 1861, a telegraph across the continent provides a faster and more reliable link than the mounted relay, and the dependence on hand-to-horse handoffs no longer makes sense for the government or for commerce. You experience the briefness of the work as a mixture of pride and impermanence. On a good run, you feel the satisfaction of punctuality, of a timetable kept, of a job well done. The company praises speed and prudence in equal measure, riders who keep their legs, who maintain horses, and who make reliable handoffs are the ones who keep the service running. But the arrival of the telegraph is not a distant rumor. It is a technological fact that changes the business model. When a wired message arrives in minutes, the expenditure on a year-round chain of stations and horses looks like an expense that can be eliminated. The company that provided the relay had succeeded in making a faster country, and that very success brings about its own replacement. There is a cultural side to the work as well. Riders become a distinct class on the frontier, recognizable by habits, by the mochila slung across the saddle, by the reputation for speed. They exchange stories at stations, keep journals or receipts, and pass along practical know-how about rivers, passes, and mileposts. The crew at each station is small and dependent on one another. There are routines of trust, where a misplaced package or a late handoff affects the whole line. Those routines are, in a way, a social technology as much as a logistical one. The relay depends on human patterns that are repeatable and teachable. When the telegraph cuts across the country, it does not erase what the relay achieved. For its brief span, the line accelerated communication across a continent and knit together points that had seemed far apart. The mail that once took weeks now moved in days because of a system that emphasized coordination, speed, and the careful management of animals and men. The work of a rider is an embodiment of that system. Disciplined, perilous, tuned to a schedule, and dependent on a chain of small, reliable acts. In the end, being a Pony Express rider in the 1860s West means inhabiting a tightly organized, high-risk relay profession that achieved unprecedented speed for cross-continental mail, but depended on manual relays and vulnerable routes, because the telegraph provided a faster, more reliable link. By late 1861, the Pony Express was short-lived. In sum, being a Pony Express rider in the 1860s, West meant fast, dangerous, carefully planned rides, carrying government mail across long distances for a brief but pivotal chapter in American communications history.